California Wildlife Center is a nonprofit that provides veterinary care for more than 4,300 sick, injured, and orphaned native wild animals a year. Once recovered, the animals are returned to the wild. We treat more than 160 species, from hummingbirds to elephant seals. We have a full-time staff, veterinarian, and state-of-the-art medical facilities. At California Wildlife Center, we have multiple departments. The one that is open year-round is our ICU, or intensive care unit. The ICU is where all of the sick or injured animals go for assessment and treatment. This is the department that cares for the adult raptors that are suffering from rodenticide poisoning, the adult coyotes sick with mange, and the songbirds who come in after having been caught by a cat. The ICU is always a bustle of activity and exists with the help of a minimum of 3 volunteers at all times. Every animal, adult or orphan, comes first to ICU for an assessment before being sent to another department in the case of an orphan, or being prescribed a regimen of treatment.
So our ICU exists to take care of sick and injured animals, typically adults, and sometimes we may have some juveniles in here as well.
What is a typical day in ICU like?
Typical day in CWC's ICU usually starts with the technicians coming in and checking on all of our patients to make sure they all did well through the night. After that, they get everybody's medications and diets ready, and then do everybody's morning treatments. All the animals get cleaned, fed, and medicated. Then they set up basically a schedule for everything that needs to get done for the rest of the day for every animal that we have in care. In between all of this, we're getting new animals, so both the technicians and I are looking at new animals that are coming in, and then doing rechecks and bandage changes and things like that on animals that are already in care. Usually in the afternoon is when I do any major surgical procedure, but depending on the situation, if an emergency arises, that might happen sooner.
Why are animals brought to the ICU?
So the most common reason that animals come to our hospital is usually that they've been negatively impacted by humans in some way. So we get a large number of animals that are hit by a car. That's probably the most common reason animals come to us. And then we get a lot of animals that are caught by domestic cats, as well as poisoned by rodenticides. So we see that a lot in predator species that are eating rodents that are affected. And then we unfortunately do see a large number of animals that are shot, usually pellet shot or BB shot, and have injuries from that. So the majority of our cases have had some kind of trauma, but we do see some infectious diseases as well. So things like West Nile virus. So this is a red-tailed hawk. It was an adult male red-tailed hawk who presented to us after being shot 4 times with a pellet gun. So you can see one near his what's called the carpometacarpal bone, which is equivalent of the part of your hand right here. Another couple in his axillary region, which is like your armpit, and then another one down here near his knee. So we were able to take all of the pellets out, and luckily none of them caused any kind of fractures. This one in his wing did cause a pretty significant wound. You can kind of tell that there's a lot of swelling there. So that wound did need to be managed for a bit of time, but he healed really well. Spent some time in our raptor flight pen just to recondition, and he was released a couple weeks ago. So this bird's been here for about a week and a half. I'm fairly certain that his injury is from being pellet shot, because he actually had a wound on both sides of his wing here. And the fracture, I don't know if you can see the radiograph, is what's called comminuted, so it's in a lot of different pieces, which indicates that it was a high velocity fracture. So we see so many pellet shot and BB shot birds, and especially hawks here, that unfortunately I think that's probably what was most likely to have caused this injury. And since it was open, there was some bone exposure. I also placed a few antibiotic impregnated beads, so they're calcium sulfate beads, and those beads will absorb over time, and as they're absorbed, they'll release antibiotics locally at the fracture site to help reduce our risk of infection. We put these tail guards on them while we have them inside. So this is to protect their tail while they're in smaller enclosures and on shorter perches. Because if we don't put this, sometimes they'll drag their tail on the ground through poop, or just break their tail feathers off. So we want to make sure that they come out of here with nice, healthy feathers. I always check their body condition while they're under anesthesia. So he feels great. He is eating on his own. So he's got nice muscle mass and some nice fat stores. Okay, so this is a peregrine falcon that we had just a couple months ago. She was hit by a car and fractured her left humerus, which is this part of your arm, your upper arm bone. And you can see that fracture right there. So how we have to manage these with wildlife is something that can be removed later on. So that's why we make, it's called an external skeletal fixator, that we make by placing a series of pins into the bone itself, and then there's something on the outside of the bird's body to hold it in place while the fracture heals. And so before they go outside and start getting exercise again and regaining their strength, we can take all of this out, all of the pins and all the fixators, and it's just the bone left, and they can start to exercise.
How are patients impacted by humans?
So we actually see a lot of patients that are impacted by human trash, unfortunately. So most of those patients are seabirds that have been entangled in fishing line or swallowed a fishing hook or something like that. But we see other instances where animals are negatively impacted by just human waste and garbage. CWC actually, a couple years ago, our team went out for an adult mule deer, a buck who got a piece of PVC piping stuck around his leg. So we actually went out, immobilized him, removed the plastic piping, treated his wound, and then sent him on his way. So that was a more unusual case, but one of the many instances of humans negatively impacting our wildlife by not cleaning up after themselves.
Why are rodenticides harmful?
So rodenticides harm more than just the rats and mice that they're intended for. They actually kill a large number of the predators that hunt those rodents. So bobcats, coyotes, foxes, even mountain lions, as well as hawks and owls. So rodenticides really cause a lot of unnecessary and preventable suffering and death. So we always encourage people to use natural methods to deter rodents from their home, but most important is actually exclusion. So sealing up holes, locking trash cans, things like that to prevent rodents from coming in your home in the first place.
What is the difference between a wildlife vet and a domestic vet?
So one of the differences between being a wildlife vet versus being a domestic animal vet is, number one, that our patients don't actually like us, and we prefer to keep it that way. So we actually do quite a lot to ensure that we limit our contact with every patient we have. So things like we cover their cages, or we alter their treatments so that they're handled as little as we possibly can. We don't talk loudly in front of them, and that's number one, to decrease their stress levels, because they see us as predators, and also because we don't want them habituating to us. We want them, once they leave our center, we want them to exhibit all of the natural behaviors that they otherwise would. Another big difference is just the sheer number of species that we work with. California Wildlife Center sees over 160 different species, so everything from hummingbirds to red-tailed hawks to elephant seals. So just knowing the different anatomy and physiology of all those kinds of species can be really challenging. And then, a lot of what we do in wildlife medicine may actually be extrapolated from what we know in the dog and cat world. So, I might take some treatment protocol from dog or cat, or even cow medicine, and alter it to use in our own patients, but keeping in mind the different anatomical and physiological differences.
What are the most challenging cases?
So the most challenging cases for me as a veterinarian are animals that come in without any signs of trauma, but are sick from either an infectious disease or toxin. And that's largely because some of the diagnostics that might be available in the dog or cat or human medicine world are not actually available to our species. So the species we work with are more unusual, or they might be just cost prohibitive. So things like infectious disease, DNA or antibody testing, or MRIs, like advanced imaging like that. There's a lot of diagnostics we can do, but things like that are either not available or cost prohibitive. So what we have to do instead is make a list of all the possible things that could be causing those signs in that animal, and then determine, okay, what's most common, what's treatable, and figure out our plan from there.
What are the most rewarding cases?
So the most rewarding cases for me are actually avian, so bird fracture repairs. Part of my job is that I get to make birds be able to fly or walk again, and I think that's pretty cool. Birds are also amazing at healing their injuries, so I'm always astounded by how resilient they are and how well they do in response to different trauma.
Support California Wildlife Center's treatment of sick, injured, and orphaned wildlife. Make a tax-deductible donation today at cawildlife.org.